for the benefit of everyone here and everyone that's watching live via Zoom today, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Nola and Tim, who are both here to talk with us today about editing for accuracy and impact. I'm really looking forward to this session because I know that my writing is not the best. I'm good at numbers, but writing, I'm sure it could have much better impact. So I'm looking forward to this session. So thank you both for coming in. So Nola is going to start off for us and do around the first half of the session, and then we'll hand over to Tim, who will take us through the rest. So for those watching online via Zoom, if you have a question, either take yourself off mute and speak up, or else you can go to the chat feature in Zoom and just type your question, and I'll keep an eye on those and pass them on to Nola or Tim, depending on who it's appropriate for. And for those in the room, obviously, you can just ask a question like you normally would. But if you do ask a question, either speak nice and loud, or if you could repeat the question that was asked, just so those at home can hear it as well, then that would be great. We might just close that door as well, just to avoid a little bit of the noise that's coming. Oh, okay, so it's about to come in, that's fine. We'll just leave it a little bit open. That's okay, just so we avoid some of the noise of people going past. And that's good. I think people online seem okay with that. So I think yeah, that's fine. So there it is. Yep. All good. So thank you very much, and take it away.
Okay. Hi everybody. So welcome to all of you who are here in the room. This is the first time I've been here with the new system, so hello to everybody who's watching online as well. So as Joy said, I'm Nola Passmore, and you'll see Tim in a moment when we swing the camera around. So Tim and I have a home editing business called the Write Flourish. We're both retired university academics. I was at USQ in the psychology department for 25 years, and Tim was in the maths and computing department for 20 years. But in 2013, we decided that 20 and 25 years was a pretty good stint in one place. We decided to try something different and use our expertise to create an editing business where we help people with their manuscripts and with other things. So that will become clearer as we go along. I've also got qualifications in creative writing, so we kind of do a range. Tim mainly does the academic and technical kind of non-fiction kind of writing. He's done some memoirs of people, that sort of thing. Whereas I also do creative non-fiction, but I also do fiction and poetry and true stories and other things like that. So between the two of us, we've got a really wide range. But today we're going to be trying to focus mainly on what you might need to know in business or work situation. So the aims, this is what was just on the blurb that went around, so we better speak to that. So the aims of this session is so you gain a greater understanding of how good editing can save you time and money, learn some tips to pick up errors in your own work, and learn some tips for polishing your prose so that it has a greater impact. So I'll be doing the first two of those and roughly the first half of the session, and then I'll hand over to Tim, and Tim will do the last one. So if you've got any questions, let us know, but we will have a bit of time for questions at the end, I think. If something's not clear as we're going through, just let us know. And we do both have handouts, so you'll find that just about everything on the slides is going to be in a handout, except maybe for the aims, because we thought that wasn't as interesting enough to put on a handout. So first of all, just look at the different types of editing, and this will be on the handout. So there's, first of all, there's structural editing, sometimes called substantive or developmental. And that kind of editing looks at the big picture. So like the overall structure of your manuscript, the logical sequence of topics and other content, narrative arc, writing style. So that would differ obviously depending on what you're doing. So if I'm working with a fiction person in their novel, then that would look at all sorts of things like their plot, their pacing, all that. If it's something like a business report, like your annual report that you do for an organisation or a training manual, you have different things you'd be looking at, but it's all that big picture. So you're looking at how the whole thing comes together. Are the topics in a logical sequence? Have you started talking about things in chapter 1 that aren't defined in chapter 4? That sort of thing. Which can be a problem, especially if you've got different people contributing to different sections, and you really need to keep an eye on that. So Tim will talk a little bit more about that later. Then you've got your copy editing, sometimes called line editing. Some people make a fine distinction, but I think it's easy to just kind of lump it in because this is the small picture editing. So this is at the finer detail, looking at your individual sentences and paragraphs. Does it flow well? Is it clear? Are there any redundancies? Are there any errors? That sort of thing. So it's that more fine-grained analysis. So in general, it's best to do the structural edit first because you don't want to be fiddling with things at the copy editing stage if you still haven't worked out your main structure. So don't go and spend an hour thinking of a great metaphor. If that, when you do structural edit, that might go anyway. And then the final stage, proofreading, which is really just checking the final page proofs for errors. So that would be like if you said something off the printer, send you back the proof, so it's about to go. That's not the stage of making big changes and something that's you want to restructure your whole thing because that does cost time and money. So at that stage, you really should like your final check before your document's going out to people. Now, I think, before I do that, can I just ask what kind of businesses or organisations or what sort of work do people do here, just so we can kind of...
I work at the Queensland Murray Darling Committee, so I work as their regional communications officer. I do all their media and at the moment they're doing reporting back to the government based on funding contracts. So I've been proofing and going through.
So you'd be doing lots of that sort of stuff in your job.
Yeah, I do a Bachelor of Communications at USQ, so I'm sort of like some of this as well, but it's always great. Learn more.
Different
perspective. That's it. I'm a digital media coordinator for an actor.
Okay, great. Sounds very, not very high tech.
Cameron, I come for our staff business called Co-Connect Her, and what we're trying to do is write blogs and posts for our Facebook and website so we can engage people and get the message out.
Great.
Hi, my name's Helen. Our business is called Store Naturally. We make a product for storing fresh fruit and vegetables in the fridge without using plastic.
Okay.
And my purpose for writing is much the same as Ken's.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm Lisa. I have a small business called Retro Hack. So I help small businesses with branding and doing their websites.
Okay.
So writing a website, blog content.
And you do graphic designers, so you have a graphic designer then probably.
I'm Paul Lockley from Untitled Computer Services. We specialise in technology support for individuals, homes and small businesses.
Okay.
And I've been
Okay.
enjoying inadequate at times.
Enjoys an entrepreneur
Well,
with
we
Chemist Co-working.
Chemist Co-working and keep thinking that we really should have a blog and we don't. So
Okay.
great.
Great. And just for the people who are online, just a quick whiz around of what kind of work you're in, just so we might be able to tailor some examples.
Yeah, Judy, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Hi. I run weight loss groups there at Canvas, and I'm just about to start online one-on-one and groups online using Zoom. And so the types of editing I do are like I create PowerPoints and then supply handouts following the PowerPoint, and also for social media.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Susan?
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes,
That's good. So I am a photographer based in Dalby. I'll just see if I can get my video up.
Only I can see you, so.
Oh, I can see myself now. Okay, so I am a personal branding and also commercial brand photographer based in Dalby. I help businesses update their portfolio of images so they can use them for any variety of reasons, whether that be promotion, just their staff headshots, and anything that can help them connect to their consumer in a visual branding sense.
Great, thank you.
Good. David? Can't hear you. Turn your video back on and I can unmute you. Yeah. So try again? No.
It's okay.
We can hear him anyway. It's alright, just tell him to walk in here.
That's better.
Hi.
We could hear you. We could.
So I just joined, so I don't even know what the question is.
What type of business are you in?
Let's see, co-working, startups, and shed blog. So we blog about sheds, and we help people that want to repair, rebuild, extend, or renovate. They're still building, order what they need online, and have it delivered to home or site.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
And if we've got anyone else who's online at the moment who's not sharing themselves via video, I can't see you. So if you just want to speak up. I think that might be
great. Well, that gives us a good idea anyway. We just thought we might better gear it a bit. So it sounds like there's fair mix just here from government departments to smaller businesses, and everyone here has got things that they're writing and need to edit and do things with. So I'm going to spend most of my time here on those last two, with give you some tips. But first of all, in a workplace, there's lots of materials that need editing, and when you start to think about it, it's probably more than you think. Most of you gave me an idea of what you're writing, but if you think of a business as a whole, whether you're a home business or an organisation, you might have signage, marketing materials like business cards, brochures, banners, letterhead, catalogues, promotional merchandise, your newsletters, annual reports, policy documents, web pages, including blog posts, training manuals, discussion papers, in-house communications. Now, some of you might not have those. Tim and I are a two-people business, so we don't do an annual report. But, you know, the different things there might relate, you know, and you might think of, if you had a bigger document, you might be really fresh in your mind that you've got a proofreader, but you might not think of some of those other things. And some errors can actually be worse than others. So I just want to give you a couple of examples. This was, I don't know if anyone else apart from me does it. Hi, welcome. I just said before that you don't need to take any notes because most of what's in the slides is in a handout I'll give out. This was a puzzle that was in TV Week a couple of months ago. Why have I put a puzzle up? Well, I like doing a TV Week puzzle. I must admit I'm a TV buff. So I did the first clue, I wrote I there, and I wrote down there, and I got to this clue over here. Sorry, on the video you can't see me pointing, but there's a clue there, that the clue is it something half hot mum. It says it's 3 letters and apostrophe 1, so I thought, okay, that's that old show, it ain't half hot mum. So I started writing it down, and I thought, oh, hang on, there's an extra 3 spaces, and I looked back and thought, I only said 1 word, and then I looked down below and it said actress somebody Streep. That's got to be Meryl Streep. There's 3 spaces. And then if you look up about the middle, it goes 111, so that usually indicates its initials, like FBI or CSI or something, but there's no clue. So on this puzzle, something had happened that had all been out of alignment, and probably at least a third of this puzzle is you just can't do it. So, I mean, for me, I was annoyed for about 30 seconds thinking, you paid $5 for TV Week and I can't do the puzzle. But this particular puzzle, they have a prize to win for $250 that you can do from the puzzle. So I imagine they probably had a lot of people writing in and saying, hey, the puzzle's wrong this week. And I don't know if anybody sent in what they could complete, and then would they have been obliged to give the prize that week? I don't know. So just something little like that somebody didn't check the puzzle, but it could have caused them headaches down the other end. This is a more subtle one. Can anyone see the error inside? This is outside a bakery in Toowoomba. Yeah, bought should be brought. Now, a lot of people might not notice that. So bought means you paid money for it, brought means you brung it. So in the context, I assume they're saying the mood is brought to you by the coffee. Now that's not going to make me not go into that bakery. I'm not going to go, well, if they can't put the R in, I'm not going to go and get my coffee. So it's subliminal. Aha, maybe they did it on purpose. So you bought, I must buy my coffee, they're not going to bring it to me, I have to buy it. Very good thinking. But those of you who've gone and ordered banners or things for conferences or signage, they're not cheap to order banners, so you don't want to find an error in your banner. And the fact that an R is missing in there might not be that important, I guess. But if that was your phone number or your website and it was 1 digit incorrect, that would be a big deal and you just wasted money on your banner. This is one of my favourites. This is outside the main lecture theatre at USQ, but you have to kind of go down a hill and turn around a corner to see it. But I always like this, the best teacher is oneself. Can anyone see something that's wrong with that? Yeah, so there's two ways of doing oneself. You can either put an apostrophe after the E, so one apostrophe S, self, so you can have it as two words, or you join it as one word and have it oneself, but you don't have it like that. So every time I walk past that, I think the best teacher is oneself, I think, yeah, unless you don't know how to use apostrophes, and then you really should have gone to your communications class.
I was just reading graffiti, I was like,
and I'm not really sure what the graffiti says. I think it says spies. So I don't understand this piece of art anyway. But they need an apostrophe. And this is one of the, it's near me, so I feel like one night maybe I should just go with my paintbrush and put it in. And I didn't have a picture of this, but this is a sign I saw in Toowoomba. And it was set out like this. It was just a small sign, big branded shoe sale. And I've written down there, print too small to read, because whatever shop it was way down the bottom. And this was in that laneway that goes from the Harvey Norman Centre up to the Old Masters thing. So you're driving, you can't really stop and look. And I'm driving up there and I see this sign. So the first thing I thought is, there's no shoe set, there's no shoe store here. But maybe it was for Anaconda or the shoe shop, or the sports shop. But I thought, but I'm going up the ramp. Isn't it just furniture in the other place? So first of all, I didn't know where it was. But can anyone see anything else? It's not an error, but it's confusing. Is anyone else confused by the sign?
Is it about big shoes or is it about
Yeah, it could be about, well, big could relate to either. Is it big brands? Is it big shoes? Is it a big sale? Is it a big sale about big shoes that are branded? I don't know. And you normally wouldn't say branded shoes. You would normally say big name brands or something like that. Designer brands. That would be good. See, they should have had you run the sign. They could have said big shoe sale, designer brands or something like that. So I didn't go and buy any shoes in that shop.
Actually, all shoes are branded enough. If they're good or bad.
They are. But some errors are worse than others. Some of those you might just, if you're a grammar Nazi or something, you might be mildly peeved. But some errors are more important. So obviously, if you've got incorrect contact details in your promotional materials, you don't want to have to trash something you've just paid money for. And we had a friend who did that, sadly, started home new business, and very first batch of business cards he got, he unfortunately realised there was one digit wrong in his phone number, so just had to throw them all out and order new ones. You don't want to be wasting money like that. Also, incorrect time, date or venue on event flyers. Imagine if you just done a letterbox drop of 10,000 flyers and then you get back and someone says, oh, I've just noticed the date's wrong. Wrong or outdated information in training manuals. And that can happen, like, you know, in computing, this happens all the time. You'll have a training manual for a particular version of something. I had a friend at Queensland Uni who teaches statistics, and there's this program called SPSS that all psychology students use for statistics. And she says nearly every single time they do an update, it would just change it enough that she have to rewrite all of her notes. So that some things can get out of date very quickly. Incorrect or missing information in newsletters or annual reports, like wrong figures in a financial record, you don't want that. Some of it can even be more death-defying, like incorrect or ambiguous safety instructions or signage. There was actually a case in Brisbane many years ago where there was a sign about keeping right unless you're doing something else. And there was a woman driving along. She saw this sign, so she went to the right of the divider. But the sign was too far forward. It meant once you're over there, stay right. So she went in the face of oncoming traffic. The other driver was killed. This girl was seriously injured. And then sometime later, the relatives of the person who died took her to court, but it ended up getting thrown out because they said it wasn't the fault of the girl. And they moved the sign before the court case was even finished. So sometimes it can be very, very serious, like just a simple error like that the instructions weren't clear. And also errors that could have legal ramifications apart from that one. I read about a case in America once where it was some sort of work employee-employer agreement, but it had a statement in there about what kind of jobs would be paid overtime and what kind of jobs wouldn't be paid overtime. But because of the way the punctuation was, it could be argued that these group of jobs over here didn't relate to the part of the sentence that said would not get overtime, and they took the employer to court and they had to pay back pay for all these people who, according to where these commas were, should have been paid. So sometimes even just something very small like punctuation or one letter wrong can be important. So, and poor editing or proofreading can cost you money. As we said, if you've got to reprint your materials, you could lose sales if you've got the wrong date or wrong price or something in your catalogues. Legal fees and reparations if it's one of those more serious ones. It also costs you time, obviously, because if an error has been made and some admin person at your company or you yourself has to then do a ring around and tell everyone that was the wrong date and this is the right date, or if you've got to liaise with the printer again and get that copy back and send them another draft, somebody's got to spend time fixing up those errors. Also can negatively affect your brand or your reputation. So I think all of us aim for having something error-free. Nobody wants to have your blog up and then realise that you've got 3 spelling mistakes in the first sentence. A lot of those things, yeah, it does affect the way that you present yourself and how your company comes across. One of my friends went to a conference once and there was an editor there handing out business cards and there's a typo on the business card. I'm not sure that editor would have got a lot of business. And depending what it is you're trying to get across. And also negatively affect the environment due to waste if you've got to throw out things that are wrong or just trash that big document you just printed off because there's mistakes in it. Now, usually when you're looking at proofing or editing a document, there's usually some standards that you can go by. So in Australia, you tend to use the Macquarie Dictionary. The Oxford is usually pretty similar, but sometimes there can be slight differences between Australian and UK usage, but mostly probably realise a lot of American spelling is wrong. So a lot of spell checkers on your computer, they'll be automatically set for the American default, so you need to change it to Australian English. So there can be a lot of subtle differences. And the style manual for authors, editors and printers, that might not be the latest version, but that's the one that tends to be used by government departments and a lot of printers and so on. But your own company or your own business, you might have your own guidelines as well.
Websites like dictionary.com.
Yep, some of those are good. Usually there's an option you can choose that we can choose if you want. You can't always choose Australian, but you can at least choose American or British. Yeah, so
We're close to British and American.
Yeah, so British and Australian are pretty similar. If you ask me to tell you the difference, I couldn't think of one off the top of my head. But sometimes usage can be different though, because sometimes a word in a different country can mean something different. Like, I can mainly think of American ones, but like say even the word barrack, like I say, I'll be barracking for you. In Australia, that means we're cheering for you. In some countries, it means I'll be booing you. So that's almost the opposite. So even though the spelling might be the same, you still need to know usage. So when possible, use the Australian ones. Okay, but sometimes when we're talking about errors, sometimes there's an actual error that that something is right or wrong, and you should be able to go to some sort of source to see what the correct answer is. You can look up a dictionary or a style guide. But sometimes it's not so clear cut. There can be preferences or guidelines. Even with spelling, sometimes you'll get the Macquarie Dictionary and look it up, but it'll say it could be this or this. So you've got a choice of which of those you use. And sometimes guidelines, there might be, like if you look at that, the government one I said, the style manual, it might suggest some ways that you might do capitalisation, but for whatever reason you might want to, in your annual report, capitalise a particular word that's not normally capitalised. You might have a reason for doing that. So some things are preferences. Different places will have different house styles, but whatever you do, consistency is the key. So on those things where you can have it in different ways, make it a choice, but then make sure that flows through the whole document. And that can be a problem, especially if you've got different people contributing to the same document. People might approach things in a different way. And I've got an example, so I'll give you the handouts now. And I think Joy's already sent the handouts to the people online. Just sucking out of you for a minute.
Sorry, just for everyone online, if you haven't seen it, oops, sorry, I sent you an email just a little while ago with a couple of attachments. So that gives you the handouts.
It'll be on the screen, but yeah, you'll have it in your attachment when Joy gives it to you. So it's a good idea to use a style sheet. And what I do is just make up a table with a cell with each of the letters of the alphabet, and then it probably makes more sense if I explain it to you. So this slide I have here is actually on page 3 of your handout. So this is an example of the first page of a style sheet I did for a client last year where they were putting together a book of the history of a school that was about to celebrate its 50th anniversary. And this was a school where parents and teachers had started it from scratch back in the 60s, and they had different people contributing different sections to this book, and a person I know was collating the whole thing. But yeah, because there were different people contributing, there were lots of just little differences in consistency. So what I do is, if I'm going through a document, and you can do this too if you've got that sort of thing, every time you have to make a decision or look up a word or something, put it on your style sheet. So you see on this one where I've got ACE, no full stops between letters, that was because when I was reading the document, that was the initials of the school, and some people put full stops between them and other people didn't. So you make a decision, and according to the style guide, you don't normally need the initials. So you put that there, and then from then on, when you're proofing, you don't have to keep stopping and making a decision. You've made the decision, and if somebody else comes in afterwards, they can look at that as well, and they can follow it through. The board was an interesting one, because you don't necessarily have to capitalise board if you're talking about, Canvas co-working, had a board meeting or whatever. You don't normally have to capitalise it, but quite a lot of people kept talking about the board did this, the board did that, the board did this, and the board was made up of parents and teachers. And I rang my friend and said, look, you don't normally have to capitalise board, but so many people have done it, what do you want? And she said, look, some people treat the board like God, so we need a capital for board. Okay, so I thought, okay, so every time we're going to mention the school board, we can put a capital. But we made a decision if it's members of board meetings, we have lowercase. So it might seem silly, but you don't want it to be different. Every paragraph's got something different in it. And if there's a word I have to look up, so say catchphrase, if you look that up in your query, it can be either one word or it can be two separate words, but it's not hyphenated word. So you make a decision. I thought, okay, let's make a decision. It's one word. Then you put that on there, so it saves you looking it up another 10 times if that's a common word.
I'll just jump in while you're on C and just say Canvas co-working. Co-working is one word.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably, you might think, well, why did they even write coordinator down there? It's probably because in the document I was looking, they probably had CO hyphen coordinator. So sometimes like that, I think, well, I'll look it up just to see if that is an alternative. And I'll look it up, no, that's not an alternative. So we'll just leave it.
It used to be though. Yeah. Years ago, that was the way it was written, but it went out of fashion.
Yeah, and I didn't look that one up before I came, so it might be one that you can do two ways. But again, you make the decision about which way you're going to go and then follow it through. So I found this has been using a style sheet, whether I'm just doing a job for a client myself, just so I can remember, or whether you're coordinating a group, it's really good. And then the last few jobs I've had, I've actually given the client the style sheet as well, because if they go and make revisions or whatever, don't want them changing everything back again. If they want to, that's fine, but then they have to remember you now need to be consistent with that change all the way through. So any questions that make sense? Okay.
So this is produced in conjunction, you have that alongside your document producing, so I can refer to what people like to do.
Yeah. So if I'm like the only editor, if I'm editing something for a client, I'll do this for myself, and then at the end I'll give it to the client as well. So if they make further revisions or changes, they can do it. Or if they choose after I've edited, they might choose down the track to give it to a different proofreader or something. And that they can give the style sheet to somebody else down the track. So everyone's on the same page rather than one person changing it this way and one person changing it that way.
There's an advantage really in having a style sheet. I mean, if you've got different authors available before the document is written,
yes.
so that there's less.
It was, and sometimes there's a house style, but you might decide we're all going to follow Harvard style for referencing, or we're all going to follow these things, and you can actually have a document or something like that. Some of these, they don't come up until you're doing it, because you don't know what's going to be problematic. Like, just a little example, I did one for a client just recently, and they used the word okay quite a lot, but again, there were 3 people contributing to this document, and some people wrote it lowercase okay, and other people did just a small lowercase o and k. So again, I looked it up to see, well, which is okay, and it turned out the ones that were okay were the word lowercase okay, or capitals okay, but not lowercase okay. So again, I just made a decision, said, okay, let's write the word, and they can change it if they like, but do that all the way through once you've made the decision. And then everybody looking at it from now on, when they go and edit their different sections and proofread it, they thought, okay, we've made the decision, we're going to do it this way, let's do it that way.
So they're required to use a standard or not?
Yeah. It's just good if there's consistency through your document. And
is it at the end or the start of your document, or is it a separate document?
The style sheet?
Yeah,
separate document.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And usually when I'm doing it, like I start with that, it's blank, because I don't know what the client's written yet. So I start with that blank, and then I add things. Every time I have to look up a word, or every time I have to make a decision about which way we're going to go on something, I will add it to my style sheet. Yeah, but like you say, if there was something people were writing and you knew there were going to be some different things were going to keep coming up, like the board being God, you could say, we're all going to use capital B for board, okay?
You could develop a firm one, like a company that built organically over time as things came up and you put them in so that in future you knew it was.
Yes, you could indeed. So if there were particular terms and things that you knew you were going to be using a lot, like those things like co-working, you can just have that and think, we're going to have one word for co-working.
And like we run sessions around graphic design, we have your style sheet for what sort of font are you using, what colours are you using. This is just an extension of that into what words do you use and how do you display them. So, yeah.
Sorry, just look, I better get moving. Give Tim plenty of time. So you do have the rest of this on your thing. So I'll whiz through these tips pretty carefully, pretty quickly. So first of all, just what do you see in that picture? So somebody sees the white Pac-Man. So some people see the black bits and you've got 3 Pac-Men. Other people saw a white triangle. Okay. Sorry? Star. Yeah, if you see the white bit. And what about this? Can anyone read out that first paragraph for me?
Sorry.
This message.
Okay, so most people can read that. But the reason I put these 2 slides up is that there can be errors or different words even. There's no E's in there, they're all 3s. But most people, if you look at that long enough, you can read that. So when we proofread our own work, it's very difficult to see errors because we know what we meant to say. We know it should be there. So you tend to, like if it's that one, you know there's supposed to be a white triangle there, so you don't see the Pac-Man because you drew a white triangle. That one, you don't see that the E is missing because you were able to read it. So when you're proofreading your own work in particular, there are some different tricks you can do to slow down your reading and to make your brain think more, so you're not seeing things that you think are there rather than what's actually there. So this, I'll just, like I said, I'll whiz through this pretty quickly because it's all on your handouts. Oops. Okay, so some of these are basics. You use the style sheet that we've just discovered so that you don't have to keep looking up the same thing. Use spell checkers and grammar checkers, but with caution, because as you know, a spell checker will tell you if the word's spelled incorrectly, but it won't tell you what you meant to do. It might put up some suggestions. And if there's a word that is spelled correctly, like you wrote cat, it won't tell you cat spelled wrong if you meant can. So yes, it's good to use spell checkers and grammar checkers, but first of all, make sure it's set to Australian spelling. But you need to look at it as well and know what it is that you're trying to check. This is one I use a lot. Place a ruler under each line as you read. And I always do that if I'm proofreading something because it just slows down your reading. Somebody told me that probably 30 years ago and I've done it ever since because we tend to scan quickly, and as I said, you jump ahead and you know what you meant to say. You don't realise the word's missing, but if you put a ruler and move it down the page, you're more likely to see those kinds of things. Change the font size and style. I don't recommend you do this for your whole document and make sure you always save it before you do this. But sometimes if you're used to always looking at it the same way, even just changing the size of the print or changing the font, it looks slightly different. So again, it slows you down a bit and you're more likely to see something. But if you've got a very complicated document, that also throws formatting out. So I recommend that just if you've got some text or something to check, save it as another document, change the size, proofread, then go back to your original to check other things. And if you've got something that's going to be like a blog, if you've got something that's going to be on screen but could also be printed off, I usually do both. So if I'm writing a blog, we've got a writing tips blog on our website. I usually type it up in Word first and then I'll go over it and edit it, show it to Tim, we'll work on it, and then I'll put it up. And then once I've uploaded, then check it on the screen again, because sometimes things can be, the formatting will be different, or you'll just see something on the screen that you don't see. And if on the screen, it's harder to hold up the ruler and go down the screen like this. So I find if I do it both ways, you're more likely to pick up errors. Also do multiple passes through the document. This always shocks clients because if you're going through and you've found a whole bunch of errors and you make corrections, or you might think, oh, that sentence is a bit confusing, I'll just rework that. You can introduce other errors as you're fixing errors. So it's always good to go through it again after you've changed things. And also, if you're looking at different types of content, like text, tables, graphs, headings, citations, contents index, You might not necessarily have to do a separate pass for each of those, but it's hard to pick up everything at once. So if you're reading the text of what you're saying, then you stop mid-sentence to check if that graph's okay, then you've forgotten the flow of the sentence. So when you go to the next bit of text, you don't know, you no longer know if that sentence is flowing well or if it makes sense. So I would normally read all the text, or if it's a chapter, so read that text, then go back and look if there's anything else like a table or a figure, because it's just really hard to pick it up on one pass.
Normally it's a good idea to do, say, all the tables together, all the figures together, all the captions together, and get them well organised, and then sort of see how they fit into the document later. Something.
Yeah, no, that's good. Listen to it. This might sound strange, but if you read it aloud, again, you hear things that you don't hear normally, or get someone to read it to you. And I found that's particularly helpful if you've got something quite pedantic like data, or figures in a financial report, or when I was at uni, I used to have student assignment marks, exam marks, and their total score. So it's often handy if you have one person with the raw data, like say if I'm doing exams, have somebody with the exam papers in front of them saying the name and the student number and the mark, and have somebody else looking at the thing and proving that, because just when you hear it, you're more likely to pick up things. And I haven't used the text-to-speech software myself, but I do have friends that use it. I have one friend who wrote an 80,000 word novel, and she used this text-to-speech software to listen to her novel, and she said once she got over the boring robotic voice, she said it actually did help her, because she said because you're listening to it like that and you're listening to it more objectively, it was easy to pick up if a sentence didn't flow well, or if there was something obvious wrong with it. And it's beyond the scope of this talk to go into that, but on your hand I've got that web link. They review some of the best text-to-speech software if you'd like to look at that further. Yes?
You say read it aloud. Would it be even more beneficial to read it out loud, record and then play it back?
Yes, that could be another way of doing it. Yeah. And it depends what you're writing to. So as well as we're managing business things here, but I do creative writing as well, and some things with poetry and fiction. Sometimes the cadence or the way it sounds is important. And there's sometimes you might read a sentence and it's not an error in the sentence, it's correct, but sometimes it just sounds better this way. And an example someone gave me once was that line from Wizard of Oz where lions and tigers and bears, oh my, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Just doesn't sound the same if you go tigers and bears and lions, oh, what? It just doesn't sound the same, it's not wrong, but sometimes if you listen to it, you think that just sounds better. Okay, use more than one set of eyes. Different people will find different errors. I did edited a charity anthology once, so two of us editing it, and we had lots of people contributing. And then at the end, a couple of people said, I'll help you proofread if you like. So we've got a couple of lay people, another editor said, yeah, let's all read the whole document. We all found different things. And is that because none of us are any good? No, it's just different people. I might be more pedantic and find a punctuation mark that's wrong. Someone else might find something that didn't flow well. So yeah, it is good to have more than one set of eyes, because different people will find different errors. Also, different levels of expertise might be important for different tasks. Again, if you've got a training manual or annual report or something, you probably want your financial person to be checking the financial tables. You want someone else to be checking instructions about something. And each person should read it as if they're the only person who'll check it. Don't assume others will pick up errors. I had a friend once, a different kind of setting, but he was called in to do some research on safety factors. I won't say what the organisation is, but it's the kind of organisation where people can die if you make an error, let me put it that way. You do not want to make an error. And they had this checking system, so this person would check everything, tick it all off, and then their supervisor would go check everything, tick it all off, and then the next person up the chain would tick it all off. But sometimes, just because of time pressures and busy, you've got to have this ready by, we've got to do this by this time. Sometimes they might have a quick check, and they found out that for some people, not the whole culture, but for some people they say, oh well, I've had a check, I think it's okay, but if I've missed anything, so-and-so will pick it up. But then meanwhile, so-and-so gets it, and they think, oh, I'm really busy, I'll just have a quick look because I know so-and-so's already checked it. Now, if you get a punctuation mark wrong in your annual reports, it's not probably going to be life or death. But yeah, if you've got different people proofing it, each one of you should do it as if nobody else is going to pick up anything. And allow buffer time. We'd all like this. This is this is like dreaming. We worked at USQ, we know what it's like when sometimes you get things on the fly and you have to have something done by yesterday. But as far as possible, if you can put the document aside for a few days or even a few weeks, you come back to it with fresher eyes. And especially if you've got several people contributing to something, you really need to allow that time for everyone to get their stuff in and for every section to be proofread and for changes to come back, and that will take time. So I know in the real world you don't always have the luxury of a lot of time, but for anything you can plan ahead, make sure you build all that into it. But remember, no one's infallible, life happens. So if you find errors, that's okay, make those corrections, just keep powering on. But with just a little bit of effort, you can assure your clients aren't confused by the likes of these. There's some good ones there. Sometimes that middle one, there's nothing actually wrong with it, except the placement's probably not the, not the best of those words. And I've just got our contact details, but they're on your handout. So sorry, I took a little bit longer than I intended. I'm going to hand over to Tim now. He's going to talk more about polishing up your prose.
Thank you.
It's okay. Yeah. Is that you?
Thanks, Joy. Can everybody hear me okay who's listening?
Susan, I can see you. Can you hear okay? Can you just nod or away? Yep. Yep.
Thanks, Susan. Well, I'm the other half of our business, Jim, and I mainly specialise in the non-fiction side of the editing. And so I thought I'd start by just looking at what are the characteristics that apply to non-fiction. Well, obviously it's usually meant to be informative or factual, but that doesn't mean it has to be boring. So one of the jobs I try and do is to help people who perhaps have got to write about a really boring topic, but they don't have to write it in a boring way. So that's one thing. You're normally writing for a particular function or for a particular audience, so you should consider them and their needs. It should be a clear and well-structured thing, engaging and motivating. Nola's talked about some of the structural ideas that we think of first. If you've got an idea of what shape your document needs to be, it's a lot more help in writing it. It may need to be referred to frequently. So if it's a training manual, for example, you need to have it structured so that it's easy to refer to things, easy to look things up, find material when you need to. And it may need to have other legal or technical requirements involved, so you need to be mindful if that's the case. You may also have tables, charts and infographics, so you need to be placing some of those. Nola's already mentioned some of that stuff. But when we go back to the big picture sort of idea, some of the things that I pick up in people's work are more along this line, where they're mixing their messaging in what they're writing. Here's a sign, for instance, that's a real sign. On the one hand, they say touching wires cause instant death, and that's pretty motivating. But as well, they've got, well, $200 fine. So, do they fine you before or after you die?
Sorry, this is all we're going to
Or are they finding you for touching the wires and dying instantly?
Are they fining you in case you don't die? Or are they going to fine you after you die, just to make sure you don't do it again? Anyway, so it's easy when you're coping with a lot of input and maybe multiple contributors and stuff. You can get your messaging a bit mixed up, and that's where an editor who's outside of your process but understands what you need to do can come in and say, oh, look, this is getting a bit muddled here. How can we sort that out? Here's another example of a perfectly good safety sign, but the issue I have with this one is there's so much information on it. You've got stick figures falling down holes, somebody taking a film with a camera, and there's some deep shafts and you're not allowed to run. What's the actual important thing here? And you kind of miss the reason for the whole sign is tucked away down the bottom there. The reason why you've got to do all those things or not do all those things is because you're in an area where there might be deep holes that are unmarked. So the important information has somehow been tucked away and overwhelmed by perhaps some of the other stuff. It's not that, yeah, so sometimes you need to think about who's looking at this, how are they going to process that information visually or mentally, and how can you help them to not get information overloaded in what they do. So one of the key issues is when you're writing, you should know your audience. And it's one of the issues that I had about today, for example. I had to prepare a talk, but I didn't know who you all were, what sort of interests you might have. So hopefully I've got something in there to interest a few people. So, but when you're writing for your audience, you need to understand them, and that should be your first priority. Who is it that you're writing for? What will they understand or appreciate? For example, if you're writing web pages, you should be aware that most people who land on your page, before they read it in detail, they're going to scan the thing overall. They're going to look at how long it is. They're going to look at other outstanding details. So the structure of your page should actually guide the eye of the person who lands so that they can see headings. Sorry about my dot points. They're a bit out of line because we converted the file from PDF to something else. And I didn't write it that way. But yeah, anyway, so you should use headings. If you're using images on the page, caption the image. It should be a relevant image, not just there for eye candy, but there should be a reason for it being there. If there's a reason for it being there, explain that reason in a caption, and then someone who may not have time to read the whole page at least gets a bit of a gist by reading maybe a caption under a picture. You can do things like using pull-out quotes or dot points to help people to just sort of get a feel for what's on your page and whether they're going to be interested in it or not. And the last point, I'm going to use a bit of jargon here, and that's something I tell you that you shouldn't do. But if you're reading, I read computer articles a bit, and I've noticed that bloggers and people like that will frequently, up the top of their page, will have an estimated reading time for the page. So it might be 5 minutes, it might be 12 minutes. And they also have here's the jargon, a TLDR, which stands for too long, didn't read. And what that is kind of an executive summary, just a quick summary of what that article is about. I don't know who invented it. Wikipedia uses this idea, for example.
The TLDR is like something ended, so here's a summary.
It's usually at the top. Usually at the top, so that someone who is time poor and says, what's this page about? Oh, here's a TLDR. I can read 2 lines and it'll tell me whether it's worth reading on or not. So you just say, in this article, I'll show you how to do this or something. And so if they're interested, they can read it or not. So sometimes in some contexts, having a reading time or a TLDR is a helpful thing to do. The other thing you need to know is what's your purpose in writing. So you need to know your audience first up, but also you need to know what is it you're trying to do. Are you trying to inform people? Are you trying to instruct people? Are you trying to entertain them, warn them, or persuade them about something? If you're trying to market something, then you're trying to persuade them presumably to buy or something like that. Depending on your purpose, it affects how you will write. what words you will use, what approach you will use. Now, sorry about this, things didn't line up quite so well. For example, again, if you think about a web audience, outside of social media where everyone gives their opinion really quickly about things, people who visit other pages generally seek factual information rather than opinion or discussion. Now, I should qualify that a little bit. What I mean here is people don't really want to know what you think about something. They want to get something for themselves out of your page. And when I said factual information, it may not actually be factual information that they're after. For example, suppose you're a fan of Game of Thrones and you go to a fan site that's talking about Game of Thrones and you join that site, and what you're after is to get more information about that world that's created in Game of Thrones. Maybe you're interested in the actors and actresses, maybe you're interested in the plots and the writing, maybe you're interested in characters or whatever it is. You want to get into that world and find out more about that world. Now, none of it is real. None of the information is strictly factual, but what you're after is some form of I suppose you'd call it domain knowledge. You want to know something about that area that you're interested in. So you're not wanting to read opinion or discussion until you can sort of be in a position to contribute to it. And when you're on a site like that, if you join one and you're watching what's happening, pretty soon you'll start to sort out, well, who are the people who are trolling this site that I should avoid? Who are the people who are just novices and don't know much about it? Who are the people who are the experts and know a lot about it? Some of them you can put up with, you like their style, others are sort of boring experts, so you stay away from them. Eventually you will sort out among that group of people who are the people that you think are good sources of information or domain knowledge about that area. And these are your trusted influencers, people who can influence your opinion as a reader. If you're in marketing, and I don't know a lot about marketing, but marketers spend a bit of time trying to work out how they can get influencers into places and help people make buying decisions and so on. It's not as easy as it sounds to sort out who the influencers really are. I don't know if you remember recently, the Department of Health has just canned, I think, a multi-million-dollar campaign in which they were paying people to write on social media about girls doing exercise. And what they did was they paid out a lot of money to people they thought were influencers to blog posts about their exercise programs and so on. But they found that, in fact, it hasn't had a lot of effect on people actually doing exercise. So working out who are the trusted influencers in a particular field or setting is a tricky thing to do. Now, a lot of what I do as an editor is, I suppose, fairly mundane, but it's along the lines of getting people to use fairly plain language. Here's an example of a sentence, for example. The company had as its main objective to increase output by at least 10% in this current financial year. And if you look at that sentence, you can actually remove all the words in red, and if you just insert one word in blue, you can shorten the whole thing. The company wanted to increase output by at least 10% this year. The meaning of that sentence is exactly the same as it was before. Well, yes. I suppose in some contexts it might be important to specify financial year. But the point is, and this is something that you can do for yourself as a writer, try and think about, is that as simple as I can get it? So there are some phrases that people use which can easily be replaced by shorter phrases and words. And this is not a complete list, this is just a few examples. For example, currently you might as well say now. In addition to, you could also say besides or also. Donation, gift is the same thing. Duplicate, repeat, endeavour, try, and so on. So a lot of the detail editing I do is along these lines, helping people just to simplify down the language that they're using. It's not rocket science, really.
So would that depend on audience?
Yes, it would. If you're writing for accountants, by all means, use all of the jargon and the language that accountants understand. If you know that that is your audience and they're the only people who are going to read it, then you can do that. You can put in specialist vocabulary, specialist terms, and they will understand it. But particularly if you're writing for the web, it's very hard to know who's looking at your stuff. You can't know your audience in great detail. So you need to be careful that you're not putting them off by using complicated language. So here's just...
In that case, it'd be better off taking the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, you don't want people to get the impression that you think they're done. That puts people off. But just simplify things, and here's a few tips for doing it. If you can use a short word rather than a long one, do so, as long as the meaning's the same. Verbs, you should prefer active verbs to passive ones. So, for example, Kathy laughed is generally better than saying Kathy was amused. The second one is passive, the first one is active. Generally use short sentences, 20 to 25 words, and paragraphs are short too, 3 or 4 sentences. If you do that consistently, it makes it easier to read. Now, sure, some of the stuff you're writing, for example, might be really complicated, and you may need to use longer sentences and words. But for general use, try and aim to shorten things down as much as possible. Nola's already mentioned you should check your grammar and spelling, and there are grammar checkers and spell checkers that you can use, but they're not the be-all and end-all of checking. Generally avoid cliches and jargon. I used the TLDR, that's one bit of jargon that I used earlier. At least I stopped to explain what it means. But generally, you should avoid jargon when you're writing. And definitely definitely avoid texting shortcuts, things like lol and ruffle and so forth. Well, keep that for the area in which it's been developed, which is...
Developed. Is that the right word?
I think not. But anyway. Even now, of course, those sort of things, should you use an emoji, for instance? And that's an interesting study in itself, because what they found is people are generally happy with an emoji like a smiley face that's echoing a positive emotion. People are happy to join into positive emotions, but if you put a sad face, it's not a good idea. There was a case where it was in an American newspaper, and it was an article about one of the servicemen, American servicemen, who stopped a terror attack on a French train. It was back in 2015. And they were heroes for doing that. And one of them was subsequently assaulted in a bar brawl. And this heading was about that. And the newspaper editor helpfully put a sad face next to his headline, "Hero assaulted in bar brawl." And the readership rebelled against that whole thing and said, look, we don't need you telling us how to feel about bad news. People found it patronising, they found it off-putting and complained. So even things like emojis, they're not the same thing as an international standard sign. It's not like, you see the wheelchair symbol on a parking space, you know that that's a disabled parking zone, and that's the same all over the world. Right? Emojis aren't like that, because Apple emojis look slightly different to Samsung emojis, and there's no really internationally agreed meaning for these these things, although they are trying to standardise them. So be careful with that sort of abbreviated thing. And abbreviations are fine if you need to use them, but avoid them if you don't need them. And if you do need them, you should always explain an abbreviation the first time you use it.
That's putting brackets after, for instance.
Yes, that's right. So RAM access memory. You know, so don't assume that your readership understands that. Again, sorry, the dot points are out of line. I didn't write it that way. But the last thing you should be aware of is that there are different constraints and conventions that apply for different types of writing. So if you're writing for print, it's different for journalism. Journalists, for example, would consider a 20-word sentence as way too long. They tend to cut it down even shorter, and they tend to write paragraphs maybe with only one sentence in there. So journalists have very tight constraints on them. If you're writing an e-book, it's different again. Page size is different. How people will access and read your e-book is different. You've got to think about that when you're writing it. Even email has its own sort of etiquette and conventions that you should use. Or blogging, again, is different. And then each social media sort of person or group have their own sort of conventions about what you should or shouldn't do. So try and be aware of what are the requirements in each particular genre. They will differ from one to the other. Right, I think that's my last slide. Yep. So if there are any questions.
We're just conscious, I know some people on their lunch don't have to go, so if you do, thank you for coming. We won't think you're rude, you suddenly get up and run out. But we can stay around for a while. If anybody wants to ask questions, we're happy to do so. But for those who have to leave, thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks for coming.
For people online, if you've got a question, just ask. Thank you both. Any questions? Susan? No? All good? All good? Thank you.
Contact details are on the handouts anyway. If you think of something later, just feel free to contact us. Okay.
Thank you very much, guys. That was good. And I'm hoping that everyone will notice that my newsletter writing improves. Thank you.